So we're almost a week into our winter retreat and into our full schedule group retreat, which will end tomorrow night. So I think each of us has had our own unique individual experiences this week. Ajahn Cunda was pointing out there are the 5 hindrances that he reviewed, and each of us likely struggles with one or possibly several at a time, going through them quite frequently, actually. It's my experience. And so it's not, of course it's not a personal thing. It's just what all of us have tendencies towards. And the Buddha identified the hindrances in terms of just was a common thread, defined by the sort of this, our defilement, or what keeps us hindered, what keeps us back from peace and calm, tranquility, wisdom, understanding, keeps us sort of ignorant and confused. And at times these can be quite overwhelming when we're sitting in our meditation or whatever we might be doing. They can be overwhelming to us. And at other times, especially when it seems we're not really paying attention to them, they can seem quite underwhelming. I remember a question when I was living in White Salmon. A person who had actually been practicing for a while said, well, so these hindrances, they only operate when you're meditating, right? And I was surprised by the question, but one could easily understand why that would be thought to be true, because, well, we notice them mostly when we're paying attention to them. But when we're not paying attention, then they can take on a life of their own, and we can go on automatic pilot and have no idea that we're responding out of desire or hatred, or these can just seem like very intense emotions to us. So the next part of our retreat, the readings we're going to have are on the hindrances. So I think we're going to go through about a couple of weeks of talking about the hindrances. So I hope you like hearing about hindrances as they're coming. I was thinking about just how many of these retreats I've gone on and done, and when I was a lay person, I started doing these long retreats. I mentioned this before, and just experienced a lot of peace, and thought that that's all my life would be like as a Buddhist monk, would just be peaceful. So I had this expectation. I come to a monastery and then arrive, and it's just peace from there on out. But that's not the case. We often have to deal with all kinds of things that come up. Even so, seems to me it can be even more intense, just because, like that question about like the hindrances aren't operating, for example, or that question about that when you're not meditating. When one starts to pay attention to them more and more, it can be pretty intense. It can be difficult, sometimes overwhelming. I can sometimes think that I've made progress, and then delving a little bit deeper, and just something comes up, and it's these hindrances again, difficulties, problems on the path. And so this is very common, and it can be disheartening sometimes, sort of painful. because we think that we've either made progress or we think something might not be as difficult as we had imagined it might be, and then it can sort of the things from our past, our memories, or any kind of difficulties we're not expecting, they can rear their ugly head. But the problem is that we're often hoping or expecting this not to be true. I was talking earlier to some of the members of the community around just this sense of planning and how we think things are going to go. And we didn't think that, most of the operating features of the reception hall here in terms of the HVAC, the heating and cooling and pumps, and would all fail at once. Or the same thing would happen just days later at the Monk's Utility Building up top. Tanyasa discovered what looked like a massive amount of smoke was coming out of the boiler room, which is this room that heats the MUB. It's not in the Monk's Utility Building, but above it, and looked like there was about to be an explosion. It was actually steam, and there was disaster was averted though. So, but these, we look forward to this retreat. Oh, it's going to be such a nice, quiet, calm time. Simplicity. Just this morning, one of our electric vehicles started having a hard time charging, and just seemed like everything was going wrong at the same time. And we can get into a sense of like, I didn't plan for this. This wasn't supposed to happen, like I was supposed to just be on retreat, Things that there's not supposed to be problems when you're on retreat. And it's, that's just exactly the opposite. Sort of this is when we start to delve into really trying to pay closer and closer attention and work with difficulties, they tend to arise much more easily, and or in ways that are unexpected. And so we can get caught in that. It's called vibhava tanha, that sense of planning, becoming, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be that. I mean, if it was that, if only it was that easy, you're like, okay, at 5 a.m. I'm going to go to puja, and perhaps you'd like to plan your defilements out. You say, okay, I'm going to have a lot of desire in the morning, and then kind of get excited right around 6:58. It's a bell. I know I'm going to eat. And then I'm going to get all greedy, and then I'm going to feel guilty about that. And then I'm going to get really tired after that, trying to meditate. And in one way, it might be nice to have kind of a sense of what actually is happening, but in another way, we just have no idea what's going to arise for us. So for me, for example, on this retreat, I've just been experiencing lots more torpor than I'm used to. And so I can kind of try to figure that out. Okay, I need a little bit more sleep, and or need to eat a little bit less, and there are things, there's causes and conditions, but there's also this sense of fighting against it, fighting against our minds. I have to make this better, I got to get this right. We're trying to constantly figure out, and plan and understand, well, this is the most efficient, best way I'm going to be able to tackle this problem. And often it's just not with being with our current experience or allowing ourselves to just observe it. There's got to be something wrong, something right, something better, something I have to do or I'll have to get. When's the peace going to come? And so we can have these expectations and not really realize that they're just just another hindrance, another problem in our practice. We just think they're part of what I am and how I should experience life. I remember that the first year I was on Agarka, I had been in Abhayagiri I had already served the winter retreat the year before, and then I think I was in Agarka for about 9 months, and then began the winter retreat. And I was quite diligent with my practice, really putting in a lot of time, and I'd go out on the walking path, and then there it would be, just peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I had to have one. I had to think about making it, how I would get it, when it would come. And it would be an hour of thinking about this. And I would come to the end of the hour and the bell would ring. I'd have some alarm and I would just think, wow, it's unbelievable. How could this happen to me? This obsessive, ridiculous, I wasn't obsessed with peanut butter and jelly before. How could this just be so intense and extreme? And then I'd sit and sometimes it would just go away, but there were times it would just come back and hit me, and the humor of it now is it's quite nice to remind myself, and it's not a big deal now. The same thing I'm obsessed about other things, but at that point in time, it was just I was planning well, maybe I can mail my mom and have her send a couple of loaves of bread and peanut butter and jelly, and then I planned bringing it over to one of my friends, Kutis, and it was just so obsessive and so ridiculous. And I think one time I just the hour had finished on the walking path, and I just got down and started crying. Just the incredible desire for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So thankfully that doesn't come up so much anymore, although there can be sometimes excitement about bread breakfast once a week. We have bread. And it's part of an impersonal process. Because at the time I was taking that very personally. I was thinking, this is me. There's a problem with me. There's a problem with my mind. There's something wrong here. It shouldn't be like this. And I was upset with myself. How can I make this right? How can I end this? How can I stop this from happening? So it's is it a suba practice? Is it I would try to work with different things, and often it was just this intense feeling of not wanting to be with this experience, thinking that it was ridiculous and I shouldn't be having this problem. And so that we want to kind of look at that in our own practice. How much there's a feeling of what's personal, what's me and mine, and we solidify that quite often. And this is why the Buddha focused on these three characteristics: this sense of not self. Just don't worry about it. It's not me and mine. You're just telling yourself that. And so we can believe it so strongly that it feels like it's me. Me and my problem. So much of our practice is trying to as Lumpur Sumedho, the title of his book, I think, is "Don't Take Your Life Personally," or "Don't Take Yourself Personally." It's really it's important to try to remind ourselves of that. And his other phrase, of course, that I use a lot is, "It's like this." It just takes the person right out of that. obsessing about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is like this. There's no one else there. There's nothing there just than that experience in and of itself. And I was thinking about, like, why, particularly in a monastery, why would something like that come up? Get obsessed with food. You might start seeing that in your own minds. What is it? Why has that started happening a little bit more, perhaps on this retreat? Because we've cut off everything else. We know that we're not going to engage in sexuality. We're not going to engage in entertainment. There's so much that's cut off, and yet there's food every day. And so we have this one sensual outlet, and of course that's going to become big in the mind. And so again, it's just not a personal process. We don't have to see it that way. It's where our minds tend to go. So, over and over again during this retreat, we'll be dealing with, well, who knows? As I said, it's just, you can't really plan it out. You don't know how it's going to go. But it's important to bring that to mind as much as you can, to really kind of remember, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure how this is going to be. So some of the monks are, for all of us, tomorrow is our last full day of group practice for a while. And so for some, this might be, I can't wait just to have my own time. Full afternoon, morning. Others might say, I don't know what I'm going to do. Without a schedule, I'm just going to get so lost, it's just going to be a total failure. And we have really no idea how it's going to go. And we might look forward to some aspect of the retreat or what it's going to bring, and it might be that very thing actually brings calamity, So the Buddha was really encouraging us to be careful of this bhavatanha, this becoming, this sense of how we think of ourselves, either in the past or the future, being something I'm going to get, I'm going to have. This is going to be mine. And then it changes all the time. So for that, just bringing that phrase up, it's like this. It really is an antidote to that sense. Just you want to plan something. I'm going to do so many hours of sitting meditation a day. I'm going to do walking, practice chanting, a little bit of sutta study here and there. I'm going to on and on the mind might plan. But the next morning you might get up and you just you're having problems breathing. Just anything might happen. Or the heater in your kuti is broken and it takes like all morning or all day to figure it out. Or actually it doesn't get figured out and the heater's broken and you can't get it fixed. Whatever it might be, we when we're open to the possibilities and we know, like anicca, it's not sure, then there can be a lot less suffering. Because then when that thing arises that we weren't prepared for, we just know, well, that's exactly what the Buddha was teaching us. You don't know. And another thing that can often come up during the retreat is our sense of, I think as Luang Por Sucitto likes to talk about, it's activation. That sense we can have of being really worked up. And how easy it is for us to get into a state like that. So you sit down, start meditating. It can take a whole hour till you start feeling, oh yeah, this is restful, and this is quiet. Then you get up from your seat and you happen to hear somebody talking in one of the rooms. You go into the room and then get into a conversation, and all of a sudden there it is. It was like just 2 minutes later, just the mind becomes completely activated, agitated, worried, concerned, interested, desirous. And it works like that. It's just 1, 2, 3 minutes of just to get totally riled up, and then an hour or two just to calm down. So we often have to be very careful with our minds. We have to be very careful with that sense of balance, that how we get activated, how we get into situations that aren't too helpful for us. So speech is a very common one. That's why we're trying to work on this during the winter retreat, honing in on what's necessary, what's helpful, what's noble. What's kind. And so we can see, in many ways, how do we decrease this intense activation that can occur for us, the ability of our minds to pick something up so quickly and then to just run with it. And then the time that it takes to calm down, it's something we need to be very careful of, because then we see the preciousness of the peace that we gain, the peace that we experience, and how it really takes a lot of effort and work to decrease this activation, to kind of just allow like a snow globe that's moving, and all this the fake snow pieces are kind of moving around, swirling around. That only takes a second. And you notice it just takes so much longer for them to all settle. One of the metaphors that Lumpur Suchito used was, he was talking about decibels, and I think the way decibels work is like every jump in 10 is a multiplication of 10. So if you're at 1 decibel, you move to 10 decibels, that's of course 10 times that 1. But when you go to 20, it's then 100 times louder. So it's times 10 from that 10 is 100. So it just gets very intense in terms of when you're at like something like 40, 50 decibels, 60, 70. It starts to get to a point of injuring your ear. But a lot of us, we tend to be very familiar with working at about 40 decibels, our activity. Not thinking of noise in that way, but just thinking about our active minds, kind of like moving, shaking, quaking, acting, responding, reacting. We're very used to that. I mean, even as you work in the kitchen, there's the Abhayagiri kitchen, sort of like, all right, there's these random different foods in the walk-in and stores, and we have 2.5 hours, okay, go. And it can feel very intense. But we can be very used to that kind of activity and that action, and it can be quite easy to get stirred up, and stirred up by the monastery systems failing, or some confrontation you had with somebody, some difficult conversation, or something that was said that might have been said so insensitively or too directly or something like that. And it just gets the mind worked up so quickly, so easily. But many of us are used to that, and then we come and we sit on the cushion and what is going on? My mind is just a mess. And so what was apt about this metaphor Lumpur was talking about is learning how to live, to experience things at 5 decibels. How can you bring your mental activity and your own experience down to that level? So that's actually where you're working. So in terms of the, deactivating the mental energy, the mental activity, there's a fair amount of work that the Buddha encourages in terms of doing that. So the Eightfold Path it's a whole rounded experience of how to actually deactivate one's mind, so that we experience peace and we are able to slow down and see and understand how it is that we're causing ourselves dukkha, how we're causing ourselves suffering. And we can't do that at 40 decibels. Because the mind it's not even responding, it's just reacting. It's just very, very fast reactions over and over. It's like, that as I was saying, one might not even recognize the hindrances operating. Wouldn't know that desire, or greed, anger, or some sense of tiredness. Sometimes you can be really tired in your meditation. You don't know, like somebody might tell you, your body was swaying back and forth, and you might not even know that. So, when we start to pay attention, then we slow, we bring these decibels down, quiet the mind, deactivate the mind. And so then we start to learn how to respond at these lower levels, to respond in a way that isn't kind of increasing our activity. It doesn't get us riled up. And this is essentially what the Buddha's teachings are around right effort. You know essentially what a wholesome state is and what an unwholesome one is. And you know how to increase the wholesome and sustain those states, and to prevent the unwholesome and decrease them when they've entered the mind. So on this retreat, we can start to try to learn this skill of operating in a way that is causing us as least dukkha as possible. And so sometimes that's learning, okay, I know this will get me into trouble, so I'm not gonna go there, even though I want to. I hear this conversation I want to get into, but desire's there. What am I able to let go of that, to renounce that? And it's very difficult to do, and it is takes a very long time to develop that, because we get rewards for enacting our desires. We do experience the pleasant. If we see something that we really like, something we want to eat, and we go for that thing, and maybe we take 2 or 3 rather than just 1, well, there's something pleasant that comes from that, isn't there? You get instead of 3, you get 1. But you also get 3 more feelings of guilt, or kind of more addiction to that thing, or have a sense that you failed, whatever it might be. There's a downside when we enact on our unwholesome desires. And then a wholesome desire is that, oh, I'll leave this for the others behind me, so that they can have something sweet. And we have to be, very careful about how we're holding our minds, especially around others, caring for others. Because we can, especially in a retreat like this, when things go quiet, then it's not actually the quiet that makes everything hunky-dory. It's sort of, that can amplify, that can begin to activate our minds in certain ways, because sometimes we're just not used to operating at these quieter levels, not speaking as much. So then we can become quite critical of others. I remember there was a funny story of a senior monk and a junior monk living together in a monastery, and this junior monk, he had developed this very critical mind, and he was just constantly looking for this senior monk to see, he was just very critical of him, and he was constantly trying to find something that was wrong, something he was doing. And I think as the story went, when the monks walk on alms round, they're supposed to have both of their shoulders covered, and especially when they're done with their alms round, sometimes some monks will hike their robe up over their shoulder to get, it can be very hot in Thailand. So it's sort of it's obviously a tiny thing, but it's seen as sort of not very beautiful. And so this junior monk kind of was watching, and he was behind this other monk who was essentially supposed to be like his teacher, and he saw this senior monk kind of threw his robe over his shoulder, and it was kind of exposing his shoulder in that way, and he thought, oh, there it is, God, he's just as bad as I thought he was. Oh, a terrible monk. I caught him finally. And so then he went up to this monk later that day, and he said, I just wanted you to know that, did you know, you did this, you're not supposed to really show your shoulder, on the way back from alms round, and it's supposed to be well covered. And the monk said, well, yes, Venerable, I know I did that, and I know that you've been actually watching me this vasa, this time that we've been living together, and you've just been thinking so critically of me and wanting to find fault. And over you've just tried to find things, and you just couldn't. And I just thought, if only this one moment I could just give him a little happiness. And so I took my robe off my shoulder, and are you happy? And so this can, this is how the mind can be just completely overwhelmed sometimes. We just take a negative view towards someone, and we can't see anything other than that. We just believe in our own anger or aversion. We think of it as true, and we fill our minds with it. And we activate ourselves. We get quite diluted in it, and we don't see how we can kind of calm down our experience. We don't see what's actually better for ourselves. We don't see how kindness and metta actually is so much more delicious than hatred and anger. And of course, the other way the mind can go in this state is towards ourselves. So for many of us, it's not others that we can get angry about or activated around. It's our own ways of being, our behaviors, and we think, oh, I'm such a fool. I really overcooked those eggs. And everyone's going to know it. And sometimes you can ask, you start asking something about, did you see I did this thing? And no, People have no idea. And we create our own comparisons, and we create the aversion and anger from others in our own minds. That it doesn't exist. Sometimes. It's just not even there. And so we're trying to just consistently be more and more aware of our own tendencies, what we call anusaya, or underlying tendencies. What's often riding under the surface that we don't see, what's the causes. What is it that we're often not seeing, or we're taking for granted? Something like a tendency towards self-hatred, or it might be, that criticality towards others. For myself, I've just been noticing on this retreat how difficult it is, and in general, it's probably been the most difficult aspect of my monastic practice, is this activation, the ease with which my mind can be taken with activity and have a hard time putting it down, and can easily get swept up in something. So I have to, there's some planning I have to deal with during the retreat around building kutis next year, and I can just see the mind. It's very hard to reach a state of calm when there's this have to, must, get it done, work it out, figure it out, and so much worry about it that's done when it actually doesn't. It doesn't take that much work. It's the worrying that takes so much work. It's the sense of having to and got to and better. And I've thought about that a lot. I mean, there are practical reasons why it's an incredibly generous thing that the retreat support team is here and helping take over a lot of the monastic duties. And it's no small thing that when we have less responsibilities on our plate, then we can focus more in certain ways on the Dhamma, at least, for the many beginning years of our practice, that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes putting down certain responsibilities in order to be able to watch the mind more closely, and the hope is that later on it just doesn't seem to affect the mind. Lumpur Liam, I think, is an incredible example of that, where he's building large Dhamma halls. He's in charge of essentially overseeing over 300 monasteries, and lots of problems he has to deal with. People come to him needing their problems resolved, but he just doesn't seem fazed. After years of work, after also perhaps lifetimes. So this is what we can aspire to, but we have to kind of be in the gutter for a while. We have to be in the sewers. We don't want to be there. We'd rather be flying in the sky, but sometimes we have to deal with some of these difficulties in our minds. And this can last many years or perhaps many lifetimes. Though we don't have to expect a miracle, we don't have to expect or plan for the best retreat, because it's always just going to be the way it is. And it's important not to take that and say, okay, well then I can just be lazy and don't need to put much effort in because it's just going to be how it is. Well, that's a misunderstanding. So we want to still try to put in especially an interest in what it is that we're doing. And that interest will then carry us through. It will help us through the difficulties we might experience. It will help us through a feeling of laziness or I'd rather not. Why bother? It's nicer to sleep in. And so as long as we can kind of maintain that interest in what it is that we're doing, then that will help us maintain whatever the difficulties that are going to arise. Because we're not focusing on an easy time, we're not focusing on things being feeling good. We're focusing on what can I learn? How can I understand this problem? And just like these storms that are coming through over the last week and a half and projected to continue, they're just the storms of our mind. They're just like that. They kind of arise, and they sometimes seem quite unpleasant. The coldness, the wet, the wind, the intensity of the rain. But then we realize, if we're pretty fortunate here, but what's happening is it's not that bad, it's just wet, wind, cold. So, try to have that same attitude towards these mind states, rather than taking them personally. It's my storm, it's my rain, my wind. And when it's impersonal, you remind yourself of that, then it just doesn't have that heaviness. And then you realize, oh, well, actually, if it's not mine, then I don't have to worry so much. I can actually take an interest and learn from it. When we're taking it personally, it's very hard to do that, because it seems so much me, and it's hard to even have an interest in it. So I think I've gone on enough tonight, and just want to encourage everyone in your practice as things change and morph throughout the retreat. Enjoy this one last day of a group practice together, and be careful of that desire around space and finally getting our time to be alone or do what we want. Because you might just get what you wish for, which is not what you actually want. And try not to take it so personally.